Welcome to the Rideshare Guy Podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
So Cherida Smith started driving for Lyft back in 2014 and has since transitioned to Lyft Driver Advisory Council. Her most recent role was as an organizer and director of the Women's Outreach for the Yes on Prop 22 campaign. Cherida has a really unique perspective because she's gone from ringing the opening bell on stage with Lyft founders on the IPO day to leading the women's driver community as a guest speaker for Lyft's International Women Day. This summer, she actually represented Lyft at the National Urban League's Legislative Policy Conference alongside Lyft's Chief Policy Officer, Anthony Fox, and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. So they discussed the new reality of the gig economy amidst the coronavirus pandemic and the protests. Currently, she's the founder of a network community specifically designed to support women in the gig economy called the Women's Gig Network. So Cherida, you sound like you're a busy young lady, so I appreciate you coming on my podcast and YouTube show to chat.
Thank you so much, Harry. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm really excited to chat with you because I think you have a very interesting perspective. You know, I think when you reached out, I was interested to know sort of what it was like on the Yes on 22 campaign. And when you sent me your bio, I didn't realize that you also got to ring the bell on IPO day. That's pretty cool. I definitely didn't get the invite for that one.
A lot of people didn't.
Yeah, that's cool. And you know what? Actually, it reminds me, I just interviewed a driver from Brazil for Uber, Fernando, and he rang the bell for Uber on the IPO day. So now we've had two drivers who have rung the bell for respective companies. That's pretty cool.
That's so cool.
So I'd love to start off. Tell me a little bit about your experience as a driver. I think you started driving back in 2014. Is that right?
I did. So I picked up Lyft as a side gig. At the time, I was a teacher, a full-time teacher, so I had the summer off, and I just took the opportunity to drive Lyft. I had heard of rideshare. I had taken an Uber, I think, a couple times, but Lyft, they just seemed really different and fun. With that. Back then, that's when we were doing the furry pink mustaches, you know. So anyway, I started as a summer thing, and then eventually it just, like, once the school year started back, it was still something that was fun for me. It was still something that I loved, and I just continued doing it part-time. I relocated to the Bay Area, and that's where I'm from. And then I used Lyft during my transition. So as I was coming home, I was transitioning into, my new life in the Bay Area, and Lyft was there for me to just pivot, and prior to joining the Driver Advisory Council, I actually was working as a consultant for a justice policy consulting firm, and I actually got fired. Okay. And once I was fired from that role, right around Christmas time, my spirits were just so low. I was so just sad and trying to figure out what is my next move going to be. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you really, really good at? And what do you really, really enjoy? And from the bottom of my heart, my answer was driving Lyft. Honestly, I felt like I'm a great driver. I love the nature of the work. And I know that I can do it as a full-time thing and use it as a pivot again until something that I'm really passionate about falls into my lap. And I'm like, as a Lyft driver, as a rideshare driver in general, there's just so much opportunity. You don't know who's going to get in your back seat. You don't know who's going to get in your front seat. You don't know where you're going to end up. But I was very determined to find something that was going to pay me and value me the way I felt I needed to. And I started as a driver, because that's where my heart was. So
where you started driving in 2014, where were you in 2014? You were in the Bay Area, or you moved back to the Bay Area?
No. Okay, so technically my first few rides were in Atlanta. I spent the summer, because I had the summer off. So I spent summer down there. But I only gave a few rides there. My very first ride was there, to the CDC, actually. And but then I went back up to DC where I was living. That's where I was
Got it.
teaching in Washington DC. So that's where I started the most
Okay.
of the bulk of my Lyft
Got it.
driving.
And then at some point you moved back to the Bay Area. Is that right?
Yes, I moved back to the Bay Area in 2015. So I was driving for about 6 months, just like full time, part time, trying to get my bearings. I had been away from the Bay Area for like 11 years. So I was trying to get my bearings back in the Bay, and Lyft was what I knew. Lyft was my go.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I think it echoes a lot of the stories and the sort of really, I mean, kind of the advantages, sometimes that people, I think, that have the best experiences with driving rideshare and driving for Lyft, they often sort of have, sometimes they're transitioning, from job to job or city to city. And so it's sort of cool to hear about your beginnings in that respect. I'm curious to know, you obviously have a lot going on these days. And I think, in at sort of a higher level beyond driving, but still in the rideshare industry. But what was the first thing where you got more deeply involved with either Lyft directly or some of these organizations? What was the first thing? Was it the Driver Advisory Council? And when was it?
Yeah. It was the Driver Advisory Council. So while I was a full-time Lyft driver and, being really headstrong about finding, figuring out what was my passion going to be my next move, I saw the email or the invite for the Driver Advisory Council, right? And at the time, I thought that it was a local program. I didn't recognize that it was as big as it was. I think the initial prompt asked, like, are you a leader in your community? Do you love Lyft? Do you love the Lyft value? I'm just like checking off the boxes, like, yeah. And I'm like, I could do this. And then maybe if I get the DAC, I might be able to go meet some people at corporate and figure out if I could get a job in tech or something like that. And I'm like, and Lyft won't be mad because they'll see on my resume the past 8 months I've been driving Lyft, So at the time, I really wanted to get a job in tech. I mean, being in the Bay Area, it's everywhere, and it's hard to not want to get in. So I figured Lyft was going to be my best go-to. So anyway, that was my plan for the DAC. When I got selected, I seriously feel like I am on a purpose-driven mission, Harry, when it comes to this work that I'm doing, because when I applied, I actually, when it was time to submit the YouTube video, I submitted my video late after the deadline. And I didn't get to prepare the way I wanted to prepare. But at the last minute, I said, you know what? I'm going to submit this video, and all they can do is tell me no. All they can do is tell me no. I was very passionate about the answers that I submitted in like the questionnaires prior to. And like I'm really committed to this work. All they can do is tell me no. And I'm so glad that I went ahead and submitted my late video because I was selected.
Very cool.
So
that was what year?
That was November, around this time, 2 years ago.
So it was pretty recent then. Oh, recently, 2 years ago.
Yes, I was on the DAC for the 2019
And so for those who don't know, what is the DAC? I mean, I guess we know it stands for the Driver Advisory Council. You mentioned it was a national program and drivers involved. What's the 30-second elevator pitch that either they gave you or that you now give?
So the Driver Advisory Council, the National Driver Advisory Council is a group of Lyft drivers that serve as the liaison between different regions in the United States and Canada and Lyft corporate. So on a weekly basis, we would get together and we would meet virtually with different Lyft teams. So across all of the teams, pretty much, to give feedback relative to the driver experience in our market. So I happen to represent drivers in the Pacific region. So that includes California, Hawaii, and Nevada. And then there's a rep for the Northeast, there's a rep for Canada, Southeast, and so on and so on.
Is the Driver Advisory Council, is it still in effect today?
I think they might be doing some things with the local teams, but the national team, no. I'm the last rep. my cohort was the last cohort.
Got it. Yeah, because I feel like, to be honest, I feel like there's been iterations and, of a driver advisory council or feedback. And, I think I've been, you and I have sort of been doing this for so long. I think I got started in 2014, so 6 or 7 years ago. It's sometimes a little hard to keep track of the iterations and the nomenclature, but it does seem like from the beginning, I do think I agree with you that Lyft always had this perception of listening to drivers, of being the more driver-friendly company. And I think that was pretty kind of manifested itself in real life. They were the first company to offer tipping, right? Drivers love that. They had the power driver bonus where you would get your commission back basically before anyone else was doing it. So I feel like they've always had that perception of the driver friendlier company. And I know in the past when we've surveyed drivers too, that was like evidently clear. I'm curious though, do you think like these days, now, both Lyft and Uber offer tipping, now Uber has their own version of driver advisory council. Do you think that Lyft's, like, what do you think is Lyft's perception these days with drivers? Do you think it's gotten better, same, or worse from when, the early days?
The perception the drivers have of
the
company?
Lyft.
A lot of drivers, there is still a lot of mistrust, but there is still so much love. So much love for the work, so much love for the independence and the opportunity for even just having this type of platform.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, with Lyft specifically, I think that they, like I said, I think they've always done a lot of stuff to benefit the drivers. And it does seem like, these days, I'm curious to know, so like when you were on the DAC, like the most common complaints I get from drivers are like, I want to be paid more, I want to make more money, the companies take too high commissions. I'm curious, like what are the types of things that you're like relaying to the companies? Because I imagine like you probably hear from all the time from drivers, like I want to make more money. Everyone, regardless, of whatever industry they're on, they want to make more money or not. And like kind of how did you see your relationship, kind of relaying that to the company? Because like some of these things, right? Like, do you need a driver advisory council to know that drivers want to make more money? Probably not. But I imagine that there's other issues that people can, that people or yourself were bringing up that the companies were maybe addressing.
Yes, because the companies, they work really, really hard. They are really determined to get the product right, to get everything right. But I think that what they do miss is the actual hands-on experience. You don't know what you don't know. So it will be kind of challenging watching like how hard they will be working and but many things they were missing. And often just because they don't have the right insight, I think at all levels. Our driver advisory council, our meetings every week, they would be for like 1 hour. And that only can scratch the surface, especially when you're talking to people from all of the regions, So I think that there could have been probably a deeper dive on some of the issues because regionally the issues do differ. And
I think a lot of it seems like it sort of has to do with the messaging maybe, because I kind of joke sometimes, like if you listen only to drivers, frankly, like if you let drivers set their own rates, they'd probably price themselves out of the market, right? Like they'd want to charge like $10 a mile or $5 a mile, something that's, not feasible from the company's point of view, and it won't be a great experience for the consumers. So it's interesting. Like, I'm curious if you have any insight on how the companies can kind of best balance like listening to drivers, but at the same time, like you can't listen to everything they say, right? They're one of the customers, but not the only customer. Or maybe you disagree. Honestly, that's okay too.
So I honestly think that was where Lyft. I watched them kind of like struggle with that. I think that I saw this a long time ago. I saw a long time ago that there are two different models with this company. There are drivers that rely on this service as their bread and butter. And then there are drivers that rely on this service just to supplement their income. And I would watch Lyft run kind of in circles trying to meet the needs of everybody, but not identifying the fact that you have two different things going on here. So they would be working. But a lot of times, but the drivers, like you say, they complain. First, being honest, drivers complain about a lot of
I think as you and I both being drivers and having talked to a lot of drivers, I think that's definitely something we can agree on.
Yes, because Lyft gives you, they kind of present themselves as like, this is a community, share your feedback with us, tell us, and we can improve the product. They do kind of leave that as an opportunity. So drivers, of course, they constantly have complaints, constantly have comments, constantly have things that they think that you could tweak, that you could fix. And I would watch Lyft kind of like be trying to catch all of it. But it's like, but they would be running kind of like in a circle, because there's two different type of drivers. There's multiple types of drivers here with multiple types of needs here. And I don't think that they had that pinned down yet. Now it's interesting now that we have seen this whole thing with Yes on 22, and that was kind of clear that there are multiple types of drivers.
Well,
No,
I was just going to say that is the perfect segue, because I think that I like the way you put it, right? There's multiple drivers, and they actually, I think every driver cares about making more money. There's a few things that like every driver cares about, but a lot of things, drivers kind of, I would say, disagree on. And so if you have multiple drivers with different, sort of, I guess, things that they're looking for or vouching for or expecting from the company, if you change one thing, it could upset a different group. And it seems like, okay, there's probably a million different types of drivers, but if we did have to narrow it down, I do think, as you mentioned, there is this kind of delineation between like what you would maybe call like full-time and part-time drivers, or people who really depend on this platform like for, not only their rent, but for the food they put on the table and what they give and provide for their family, and the others who maybe use it with another job or use it, in the summers or whatever it may be. And it seems like those were sort of the two, when I saw I'm curious to know, so kind of talking about the Yes on Prop 22, what did you see? Like, how did you see drivers falling along the lines of Yes on 22 or No on 22 in that respect?
So because I was working on the Yes on 22 side, I talked to mostly drivers that were for it.
Right.
The way it worked, I think that like drivers would receive information to sign up to the coalition from their apps. So that would be Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates. So we're already, we would reach out to them after they would sign up to the coalition. And once they had already signed up, it wasn't like a hard sell. Oftentimes they knew exactly what was going on. So I talked to the most part to drivers that were in support of what.
How'd you get involved with the Yes on 22 campaign in the first place?
Well, because of the work that I had done on the DAC, and I was very passionate on the DAC. I did a lot of independent work for Lyft while on the DAC, and that was recognized by the company. So they went ahead and kind of alley-ooped me to the campaign consulting firm. So I think there were 2 Lyft drivers that were on that were working on actually on the campaign. For the most part, everyone else though was new to the industry.
And what was your role specifically? I think did you call yourself an organizer, or?
I called myself an organizer / director of women's outreach.
Cool. And so it sounds like, what were your main, we don't need to get into everything, but what were your sort of main duties with the Yes on 22 campaign? And was this a full-time thing during the duration of the campaign, or part-time?
Yeah, it was full-time. I started at the end of January. And because of my background with Lyft and the DAC, I championed a lot for women and the women driving experience. So it only made sense that when I got to the campaign that I would be, working with the women. So I think there was a initial plan, but then you have to remember COVID hit within a month of joining. So what started as where there was going to be like a lot of driver facing, and I think there was a plan for me to be doing a lot of the driver events,
meetups and groups and things like that. Yeah.
Yes. But because we have to switch to, because of COVID, we kind of got reduced to making a lot of phone calls, honestly. So I would reach out to different women and try to build relationships with the ladies throughout the state. And that is what ended up inspiring the women's movement.
Very
network.
cool. Yeah. And we'll definitely, I'm curious to learn about that. But while we stick on the 22 campaign, so this was basically a full-time job for you from February to November. So sort of like 8 or 9 months or so. Okay,
yes.
Very cool. And most of your duties were was it talking to drivers or gig workers, female workers, drivers, gig workers, or others?
So not just women, but
Yeah.
definitely women. Talking to all of the rideshare and the delivery drivers.
And these were typically drivers who were in favor of Prop 22 or wanted to learn more, or I'm curious to know, I guess we don't need to have a whole phone call, but like what was like your average phone call with one of these gig workers? I'm curious. What did you guys talk about?
So good question. It was a variety of responses. Some people that I would reach out to were really, really passionate about the work. Whether they were part-time or full-time, they still really, really relied on the flexibility and independence that the rideshare or the delivery services provide. So for the most part, these ladies were totally just in support. We would talk about why the flexibility was so important to them, why this type of work was something that they were so invested in, and if their stories were profound or particularly unique, then they would be elevated so that they could be part of the media. So if you would see like the commercials on television or the radio ads or whatever, that was kind of like how that process went.
Was your goal then to find people to sort of elevate their voices in the media, or was it a combination of that and just, sort of like outreach? And I mean, I guess I'm curious too, I guess the other part is like, was this like a voting, were you at, did you want these drivers to like obviously like go out and vote, or what was like the goal of these calls in your mind?
The goal was to really like get them fired up, was to get really excited. I mean, particularly in the beginning of the year, things changed a little bit when we got closer to the election. I don't want to say a little bit. They changed a lot.
Got it. And that was more like getting them to vote towards the end of the election. Okay.
Yes.
Clearly, I don't know much about running a political campaign, so you're educating me right now.
That's when it got a little more hot when it came to texting and to educating the drivers on the voter process, because that's a thing too. A lot of people don't know about the voter process, and there's a lot of Lyft and Uber and rideshare drivers, delivery drivers that may not be citizens of the United States, that may not be able to vote, but still providing with them with that education and ways to still spread the word. Earlier, the focus of the campaign was very like event based and meetup based. So that lasted for maybe, like I said, like a month and a half. And then after that, it was strictly just like banging the phones out and trying to find drivers that would be that were passionate and that were would be willing to, like I said, share the word, spread the word, and just be kind of like champions in their communities about supporting 22.
Got it. Interesting. Well, I won't grill you on all the positives and negatives about the 22, because we actually just did a podcast with Kate Conger from the New York Times on Prop 22. So if anyone is interested in that, I do recommend they check that out. But I am curious to get your personal take on 22. I guess I'm assuming you were for it since you were working on the Yes on 22 campaign. But do you have any thoughts or quick comments on, I guess just the proposition itself as a driver and someone working on the campaign?
Yes. So I was totally pro 22. Okay. I couldn't have done the job if I wasn't passionate about it. I couldn't have done it if I didn't really mean it. And as far as I'm concerned, Yes on Prop 22 is a win for people who have, for entrepreneurs, A, and B, people who have their own dreams and their own businesses or their own dreams that they're trying to build, and they use gig work to make those, to keep those dreams afloat, and that is very, very common. And California is such an expensive state. We absolutely need the flexibility to have this additional income. So for me, the flexibility was why I loved Lyft. The flexibility and the independent nature of the work is why I chose the job. So for me, whether I was on the campaign or not, I would have voted yes on 22 for sure.
Yeah, and it does seem like, you're sort of the perfect spokesperson for the Yes on 22 campaign, in that, you used it initially, when you were sort of moving around from city to city, which is like a great use of the services. And I think that sort of gets at like the people who are maybe no on 22 or who aren't as happy with the experience, right? If you're like driving in the same city 50 hours a week for 5 years in a row, you're really not able to take advantage of some of that flexibility and some of that benefit. So it is interesting. I'm curious, were there any big takeaways or observations from you working on the campaign? Like, what's the one thing you walked away with, like, wow, that surprised me, or wow, I liked that or didn't like that?
Well, I wish that I had been a little more closely involved. I have a lot of passion for this work. This is something that I was working on, before I got on the campaign. It's something I'll be doing after the campaign. And what I can say is that I don't believe that the campaign really was prepared for me to have a brain. I can say that. I don't think so. I think that the campaign was prepared for me to be kind of like a Lyft spokesperson that is just pro yes, just because. But actually, like, I am this is my life work. This is my life work. Like I said, I feel like I know that I'm on a purpose-driven mission with this. And I wish that I had been a little bit more involved while, like, on some of the
strategy or the bigger initiatives, things like that.
Yeah, particularly because of the experience I previously had with Rideshare, and with the DAC and things like that. So I do wish that I had been a little more in the loop, but it freed me up and gave me a lot of time to really to spend with the ladies and to spend with the drivers and to really get to know the drivers. And this year was a challenging year.
Ride. Either noun works.
It was very, very challenging. I mean, this was the worst year for us as drivers, with COVID, and then with the George Floyd protest. There was a lot of fear out there on the roads.
Are you still driving these days, or how I mean, obviously, while you're working on the campaign, I assume it's tough to drive, but when people ask if you're a Lyft driver, are you still an active driver once in a while?
I still claim to be a Lyft driver, even though I haven't given a ride during COVID.
It is kind of challenging. I'm actually curious to get your perspective, because like someone like me, I'm still technically an active Uber and Lyft driver, but these days I'm obviously, spending 100% of my time, if not more, running the blog and the YouTube channel and the podcast and, all of the other, monotony in between. But it does seem like, I'm curious how you think is the best way to kind of balance like the people who sort of know the most about driving. How do you balance that with like being able to then go and give feedback, to the companies? Because like, I feel like if you get really good at talking to the companies, that sort of becomes your job, right? And then you can kind of do less of the driving, right? Like maybe like myself. How do you think about that? What do you think is the best way to balance that?
To balance it, it's tough only because it's COVID, tough right now because if it weren't COVID, I would still be on the road, because I like the nature of the work. I was telling a friend of mine this morning how much I miss Lyft driving. I miss the passengers. I miss the randomness of it. I miss the reward, So if it weren't for COVID, Harry, I still would be driving.
Got it. Yeah, I think a lot of drivers are actually in that situation right now too. So I think you're spot on. So I'm curious to know, shifting gears a little bit. You've done the DAC, you've done the organizing with Yes on 22. What haven't you done these days? Only kidding. But I guess the other thing I'm curious to know is you worked on, I guess, tell me a little bit more about some of the other projects you've done. Like you mentioned the women's gig network that you run, and how did some of these come about?
Yes. So on the campaign, like I said, as the director of women's outreach, that was my job, to build relationships with women that were driving throughout the state of California. So this was new for me because on the DAC, I was only accustomed to talking to Lyft drivers. But on the Yes on 22 campaign, I got to broaden my scope. I got to talk to Uber drivers. I got to talk to, delivery drivers. And delivery is something I had never done before. I've never actually done any delivery. So that was just a whole new world for me. And what I learned in talking to these ladies is that there is such a need for us to build and have a community. So there are so many different, how should I say it? All rideshare and delivery drivers, they come to these platforms, but they oftentimes have other things that they do. There's other jobs that they work. There's other networks that they're a part of. So my vision with the Women's Gig Network is to have everybody be able to rely on other networks and other resources. Oftentimes when you're driving rideshare or delivery, you're in a transition. It's a pivot. It's because it's out of desperation. There's some type of need. So I feel like, why not band together and use each other as support? Because that is something, like I said, I championed for women while I was on the DAC. The companies do not, they don't cater to the needs of the woman driver. And the women, we have different needs. We gotta figure out where's the best place to go to the bathroom. Where do we put our purse? How, just there's different things that we have to consider. Driving after dark, and it gets dark at 4:45 now, we have different things to consider. So I want us as women that are brave enough to explore this type of work, I want us to feel like we have a community.
Yeah, I think we've got a little visitor down here. George, you want to say hi?
Hi.
I'm right in the middle of an interview. Okay, well, very cool, and I think we'll leave a link to your work at the Women's Gig Network to what you're doing over there. I think it's really cool, and obviously you're very passionate about a lot of this stuff too. So I think the final question that I had for you, Cherida, I was curious to know just where you sort of see, I guess, now that you're doing gig economy, where do you see the future of this gig economy going for the workers? I mean, what do you think are the challenges that you're passionate about yourself or that need to be solved for the industry? Because I think definitely there's some positives and there's some negatives, but I think we all want things to improve for the drivers and the workers. So I'm curious to end on that question for you.
So good question. Clearly gig work is here to stay. It's only growing, and especially in light of the coronavirus and clearly the instability of working a real job, quote unquote real job, people are going to be leaning on gig work. So I think that it's a really good way. Gig work is a wonderful opportunity for people to lean on the platforms. Use them as opportunities to make extra money and to build the life that you want. They're flexible for a reason. You can stay independent. You can build the life that you want to build by leaning on these gig platforms. So I think that I'm just blessed to be working in this industry, and I'm blessed to have had Lyft to pivot and to be able to stay true to myself while making a living.
I think I like that. Use them, don't let them use you, maybe. No, but I think that makes sense, right? It is sort of like taking advantage, like what we talked about earlier, taking advantage of the best aspects and the flexibility and the nature to pivot. So I do appreciate you sharing your perspective, and I thought of one more question for you quickly. What's next for Cherida?
What's next for Cherida?
What are you up to next?
I'm so passionate about this Women's Gig Network. I am looking to see it to grow as big as possible. So if there are any listeners that you have that are interested in chatting with me or in investing or sponsoring whatever, this wonderful network for these women that are being so brave on the
Very
road, to commune and to build camaraderie and relationships, please, please, please reach out to me. This is a passion project for me, and this has become my life work.
Very cool. So if people want to learn a little bit more about that, is that the womensgignetwork.com/connect? Is that the website? Cool.
Yes.
And we'll leave a link down below or in the show notes so people can click on that and don't have to type it in the browser. Well, Cherida, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'll look forward to hearing from you again in the future.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.